I always get excited when I see those iconic shirts. The Hatton-Castillo fight was a good one.
We were just talking about Castillo on one of these shows. Castillo had some interesting fights with Mayweather.
Yeah.
Very close fight that a lot of people thought he beat Mayweather in the first one.
Yep.
You know?
He was also involved in one of my favorite fights of all time against Diego Corrales.
Yeah, that was that fight. You know, a lot of times on this show, I'll talk about how fighters from the more modern era, a lot of them, some of them, well, you could always say some of them, but put it this way, I favor the golden era to a certain extent. And I don't say that, I have to qualify that because I think we've watched some really great fighters in our generation that can stand in with any era. I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Pernell Whitaker. I mean, you could, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather's tremendous. Benitez. I mean, I'm going back a little bit to the 80s, but I also think that there are fights that, back in the golden era, back in the 20s to 30s to 40s, even some of the 50s, you had regularly the best fighting the best, and you had more clubs available in cities where a fighter could go in. You could go in and there could be 6, 7, 8 clubs where there's action going on. And there's more action going on, more places to develop your skills, to apprentice, to learn, to develop, to grow. I've said it before, it's kind of like a lawyer who doesn't get to go into a courtroom. If he goes in a courtroom more often, he's going to be a better lawyer. If the surgeon does more surgery, he's going to be a better surgeon. And that was part of it, why I hate to use the word I favor, but I have so much respect and esteem for that time, because these guys, I'm not saying that you're supposed to have 200, 300 fights, but these guys had 200, 300 pro fights. And because there was so much action, there was so much availability, and you were able to fight the best guys and develop and learn from fighting. And there were more teachers, quite frankly, better trainers around, because that was their profession, not just a side job, not just where they could throw a towel on their shoulder. They actually had to put the time in and the apprenticeship to earn that place, to earn that title, to earn that right, that privilege to be a trainer. It wasn't just handed out because a guy, walked in the gym and said, I'm going to be a trainer. He had to go through the process. And I'm just saying that I'm glad you brought up that fight, because that fight, as many great fights as you could go back to the era of Armstrong and Archie Moore and, even the 80s when you had Bobby Chacon and Bazooka Lamone and Boza Edwards, and, you had the best fighting the best and so many fights to pick from. In a sport that's been around as long as boxing, longer than any other sport, that fight you just mentioned, it can stand on its own as one of the greatest in the history of the sport. That's an extraordinary statement for two reasons. One, because of how long the sport's been around, and because of what I am stating and documenting about, how there was a different era, when there was an era that existed where fighters would fight 30, 35 times a year like Henry Armstrong instead of 4 times a year. Where fighters, instead of at the end of their career having 30 fights, at the end of their career they had 300 fights. And it's extraordinary that we could be talking about, within our time, that we could be mentioning a fight with Castillo and Corrales, the first one, that stands with the greatest fights of all time in this great sport. And within the same time period, that another one stands right with it. Mickey Ward and Arturo Gatti.
Yep.
Extraordinary. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm kind of I think I'm almost correcting myself, or I'm almost not berating myself, but reminding myself that, and we all have to be reminded sometimes that things are pretty good. Yeah, and that's such a simple thing and such a simple phrase and such a simple statement, but we forget that things are pretty good. Mm-hmm. We look back to the other times when they were better, but sometimes we don't look close enough to our times that they're pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And maybe very good. And that's a reminder. And I'm glad you'd said that. I'm glad I wore this shirt. I didn't think that it would provoke this kind of conversation to open up this show. But I guess it's a reminder to me, to everybody, that sometimes we look at other, it's like that old saying, the grass looks greener across the street, but sometimes we think that there were better times. And our times are pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things that
and here's that round 11, and I think Castillo had him down 2, maybe 3 times in the 10th round. And I mean, Corrales was basically out of it at one point. He took his mouthpiece out. I mean, he's rocked.
No, but see, what you just said, that is a dynamic. That is an X factor that really changed the course of this fight.
Yep.
Because when he gets to that point, he's gone. If he doesn't take his mouthpiece out or allow his mouthpiece to be spit out.
He took it out and basically like spit it out and they took a point away at one point.
But if he doesn't do that, he gets knocked out.
Yep. And look at him.
So there could be some people, and I'm taking nothing away from this late, great warrior here on this night. And God bless him. He's not with us anymore. But watch what he does. He takes the mouthpiece out. He's gone. But he's getting up, but he takes the mouthpiece out. I believe it's in his glove right now.
Credit to Tony Weeks for not stopping this, because he would have stopped one of the best comebacks in the history of boxing, at least up there in the top.
Now let's not miss what you said here. He took his mouthpiece out
second time,
and he left it on the canvas. So
bought himself a good 20 seconds.
Yeah, he saved himself.
And
now there's going to be people, Ken. I mean, if we're going to be pure about this, there's going to be people that are going to say, if he didn't do that, if he didn't basically do an infraction, right?
Yeah.
It's fair to call it an infraction, right? Go against what you're supposed to do. He doesn't win his fight. Now, that takes nothing away from the greatness of the fight and the greatness of him to come back here, but it is something that should be mentioned. Am I right?
Oh, it's the whole thing. I mean, it was like the perfect storm. The ref waited, and there he hit that perfect left hook, and now you got Castillo in big trouble. And again, Tony Weeks has let Corrales come back from 2 big knockdowns. I mean, these guys are exchanging. There's not a lot of defense here.
He's recovered now, Corrales, which is pretty extraordinary, the capacity to recover. When you look at the condition he was in, 40 seconds ago.
Look at that shot.
He catches him and he's got him hurt now.
His left eye is completely closed, Corrales's, and now he's got Castillo on the ropes, and it's all over. Tony Weeks.
And Weeks did a good job.
Great job.
Yeah.
Because he was clearly out on his feet.
Because he didn't stop it too soon.
Yep.
And he didn't stop it too late.
That's right.
He did it perfect.
Oh, perfect. That was an awesome refereeing job and made for one of the greatest fights in modern history, I think.
No. See, that's where I'm going to correct you. And that's you got to take those headphones off if you don't hear me. It's this way you hear me when I speak. Please. I just said that these fights fit in the greatest, not just in modern history, in any history. These fights fit in the great history of the sport, period. 200 years, 100 years, whatever you want to trace it back. You want to go back to the Greeks. You want to go back to the first fights in the Olympics. Wherever you want to try to trace this sport to the real genesis of it, it's a long time. These fights match up in any of that history, any of that place, not just modern history.
That's fair.
Yeah, it is fair. Not modern. Say it, not just modern.
Not just modern.
That's right.
All history.
Because, which is extraordinary. We were around to see it. And Mickey Ward and Gatti first. Mm-hmm. Again, that first one, they fought after this. Warming up to what the first one is.
Yep.
Same thing with movies.
Yeah.
When is the sequel as good as the first? Very rarely.
Yeah.
Godfather 2.
Yeah.
Okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But very rarely. Very rarely. What about Rocky 2? Rocky 2...
Not for me. Rocky 1 was by far
oh,
better.
of course. I know. But I'm just saying.
It was okay.
It's not bad, but some of them are bad.
I would say the Rocky matches
Godfather
up.
3 was terrible.
I would say that the Rocky movies match up well with the Gotti Ward fights. They were good. The second and third were good, but nothing matched the first.
Yeah.
And then I talked to Diego Corrales the week after this fight in Vegas. I was at another event and he was in there and he was still, his face looked a mess a week later. I mean, a mess. His eye was like all bloodshot inside. He was, but always such a nice guy and very approachable, super friendly, really good guy. That was a fun fight to watch.
See, those are the kind of fights why I rail against the incompetence and corruption in the sport sometimes, because of the reality of what we just watched there. That why I've said it so often on ESPN for my 22 years, that these fighters don't leave the ring with what they go into the ring with, that they often leave parts of themselves in the ring.
Yep.
Parts of themselves were left in the ring that night.
Yeah.
You know, emotionally as well as, you know, mentally, emotionally, and physically. You know, you don't get those things back.